I think it's important to talk about the cultural inheritance, to talk about the culture, to talk about the things that we don't see in the history books, because it's really interesting. If we don't talk about those things, it's like an entire lost part of our past.
You're listening to What is Black podcast, where we have conversations about issues important to raising healthy and thriving Black children and adolescents. I'm your host, Dr. Jacqueline Duget, a board-certified pediatrician and mom. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What is Black. I have with me today my special guest, Shonda Buchanan. For this discussion, I wanted to learn more about Shonda's new memoir, Black Indian. I know as an African American who is biracial, I think when we talk about our family lineage, we basically talk about either European and African ancestry, and I think Shonda has a really great perspective because of her diverse family background, and I'll let her get into that as we start the conversation. So welcome, Shonda, to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I am honored that you are our guest today. So, Shonda, before we get started, if you can share with our listeners a little bit about yourself.
So I live in Los Angeles right now, but I'm a transplant. And the backstory is I came to Los Angeles when I was 18 years old from my hometown of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I guess as a kid, I felt like Kalamazoo kind of wasn't big enough for my artistic spirit. And I kind of always knew that I was leaving. So at 18, I came to Los Angeles, and I knew for some reason that I didn't want to go directly to college. I wanted to travel, hopefully travel the world. Like that was one of my goals. And when I got to Los Angeles, the first year or so, I really didn't like it. And then the second year, I kind of gravitated towards a writing community in Leimert Park. And it was the World Stage Performance Gallery founded by Kamau Daoud, award-winning poet, and also Billy Higgins, who is now deceased. But Billy was one of the most recorded jazz drummers in the world. And I kind of fell into this crew of writers who really helped me hone my voice as a writer, as a young writer, a budding writer. And then I was here until 2004, and then I got a job at Hampton University. I taught at Hampton University for 13 years. And again, I kind of fell into a writing community there, a really wonderful community of poets. I was on the board of the Poetry Society of Virginia, the Hampton Roads Writers, just really, really supportive and fantastic writers, poet laureates who, belong to the Poetry Society of Virginia. But even though I loved my community in Virginia, I always pined for Los Angeles. And so I moved back here in January 2018. So I guess my teaching trajectory is I received my teaching fellowship, my MA from LMU in English, I'm so sorry. And then I also received my MFA from Antioch University, which the Antiochians, I have to give a shout out because we're fantastic. And the Los Angeles, ones at least. And I received my MFA from there. And then I decided I wanted to kind of branch out of Los Angeles in 2004. So I applied to that job at Hampton University. So that's my educational trajectory. And right now I'm back in Los Angeles and I'm back teaching at LMU.
Oh, very cool. So, as you've alluded to, you are a writer as well as a educator and poet, and you have your new memoir, Black Indian. So I was wondering if you could, share a little bit about your new book and what motivated you to write the book.
My book, I consider it a prayer for my family, and I think it took me a while to think about it like that because I wanted to tell the story of my mother. I wanted to tell the story of my mom and my aunts. I wanted to tell that mother-daughter story as well as the sister-to-sister relationship. I talk a lot about my sister, Rochelle, who is the sister who actually raised me. And I kind of wanted to give testimony to their lives as women, what it was like to grow up in the Midwest as a mixed blood woman, what it was like to kind of be in, continual relationships. And I think the thing that really informed my childhood, besides the love coming from a big family, was also kind of the dysfunction. I think it came from heredity. I think it came from kind of a loss of identity of traveling on that migration trail. So it felt to me like as a kid, I was caught in this. As a child, you just don't think about certain things as certain episodes as, wow, how is this my life? Like this, I don't think this is my friends' lives. You just kind of are surviving, when violent things happen. And I was never physically abused by my parents as a child, but I just saw a lot of abuse in the relationships around me. So when I started writing the book, I really wanted to tell that story about my mom and like the beauty and then also the pain that I saw them suffering and living with, and then their resilience and the triumph, of those relationships or surviving, certain kinds of abuse and addiction. And then as I really started researching it a bit more and looking at the family history and the intersections of our Black and Indian heritage, I was like, wait a minute, there's a reason why it felt like to me, why we were acting out this theater that was so kind of caustic. And we talk a lot about how slavery is the actual enslavement of Africans from Africa is the collective inheritance of Black people in America. But we don't talk about how the intersections of enslavement and the Trail of Tears, and then also French trappers and missionaries marrying people of color, and kind of what that tri-raciality suffered, right? And or what they had to deal with, and so in that I started just kind of pulling together certain stories of our intersection and stories of my grandfather's. My father's grandfather being an African man who had two wives at the same time. So one was a Choctaw woman. This is the family lore. One was an African woman, and they both lived down the street from each other in Mississippi. And then, many more stories from my mom's side of the family. So it became this story of what I call kind of a tapestry, or kind of the real hidden story of Black Americans in this country. And it's interesting because I'm not trying to tell the tragic mulatto tale, because I don't want to do that. I'm really trying to tell the mixed blood tale, or the free people of color tale, at the same time with my fist pumped in the air, because I know I am Black in America, because I get treated like a Black person in America. So I talk all about that in the book.
All right. That sounds fascinating. And I think so many, as I alluded to when I started, I think so many people can relate to that. A lot of times I think, like I said earlier, I think historically, I think we talk more about European and African ancestry for a lot of Black Americans. But I know that there are a good number of African Americans who have that lived experience. They have European, African, as well as Native backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so you write about, like you alluded to as well, you write about an intersection of race and culture. And I was wondering for you, again, what speaks to you about the importance of exploring the intersectionality?
I think that it goes back to the piece of, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? And that's kind of something that for Black Americans, I think we've grown up with, that Sankofa, a certain group of Black people have grown up with that Sankofa principle of you must know your past so you can change your future, right? You must know where you came from so you can celebrate and you can move forward or past a certain thing. And so I think it's important to talk about cultural inheritance and of this particular, group of folks and traditions, I think because there is, it's that duality of you think it's only Black people in America suffering from being Black in America, but it's a systemic issue and a systemic ill that was constructed. And you can look at anti-miscegenation laws of the 17 and 1800s, where they made it illegal to marry. White men couldn't marry Black women. They couldn't marry American Indian women. And then there was a moment where African Americans or Negro at the time or colored, couldn't marry Indians because they were trying to keep count. They were trying to keep the races separate because, if you did it, then there could be insurrection and there could be a unification. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, we are more than them. This is the Nat Turner principle, right? We are more than the slavers. We are more than the slave masters. We actually could rebel. And actually, it's interesting, many more rebellions did happen than are reported in our history books. Nat Turner just happened to be, a really incredible, kind of powerful one, caustic one, particularly after the Nat Turner Rebellion and the slave masters just cracked down on all of their slaves. And that was, terrible, but, rebellion is necessary. The Bacon Rebellion, a lot of people don't talk about that. That happened in Virginia as well. And that was actually Africans and the Europeans rebelling or fighting, the American Indians in that particular area. So I think it's important to talk about the cultural inheritance, to talk about the culture, to talk about the things that we don't see in the history books, because it's really interesting. If we don't talk about those things, it's like an entire lost part of our past. And I think too, when the issue of the 2020 census now, it's not just the immigrant question, it's also how many mixed people are there? How many people claim bi or triraciality? And in 2020, why is this still a thing that we're dealing with? Why can't we all just claim Americans, right? So, and I'm not a politician. I'm a quote unquote lay historian. I'm the genealogist for my family. But when I see stories continually crop up in my research, where things that I've never seen in my history books, I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem.
And I think you speak to an issue that is concerning, right? Unfortunately, a lot of times history is written from the perspective of the person that's writing that history.
Right.
And I think what's great is that you had an opportunity to write your own perspective, your own history from your own lived experiences, from your family's lived experience, which I think is such a blessing, I think, in some ways, and such a unique opportunity. Because, I think, you mentioned before, there's a lot of trauma, right, historical trauma for many communities of color, especially African-American and Native cultures, and others as well. So I don't want to discount other individuals' experiences,
right, exactly,
ethnicity, or racial experiences. How were you able to, to do the research? Like, what was your research process to be able to unearth and find these great family discoveries?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that I knew I had to do was to write down everything that I remembered, to write down everything that I was thinking about in terms of what my mom had told me about my heritage, what my aunts had said about my heritage, what my grandfather, said about our heritage, because a lot of us do come to our mixed raciality through the oral narrative, and that connects to slaves not being able to write, being punished if they could read, having their ears cut off, or if they showed any kind of intelligence or any kind of education. So we told our stories like African griots. We told them to each other. We passed them down. Think roots, right? for me, I knew I had to write down everything I remembered, and then I interviewed people. And so, because I wanted to know, like, what do you remember? What did my grandfather, say to you about your heritage? What did my grandmother say to you? And my grandfather was dead. I couldn't interview him. My grandmother was dead on my mom's side. I couldn't interview her. My grandmother on my father's side had Alzheimer's. And so she remembered me, and then she would forget me. So I had to just, go to the oldest, which was my great aunt Mildred, and ask her what she remembered. But then also the youngest aunt in the family, my Aunt Mildred, remembered a lot more than a lot of the other folks. And when I got there, and I would ask her specific questions, and I would ask hard questions too, because I'm not that kind of interviewer who, just because you're my family member, I'm not going to be easy on you. So I would ask questions that I would say, what did you think about, Grandpa Stafford was my grandfather, her dad. I was like, what do you think about your dad's infidelity? Do you think that he intended to hurt our my grandmother, your mother? I mean, what do you think about that? And that was like a question, in the middle of the interview. I didn't start out with that. But she gave the most interesting answer when she said, well, Daddy always said that those women just somebody had to tell those women that they were pretty. And if he didn't do it, who would tell them that they were pretty? And I was like, is that really how you saw it? And that probably was how she saw it, because her worldview had been shaped by, a man she loved, her father, right? And then also a man she didn't want to betray. And I think that's really an interesting point in terms of women who have learned to keep secrets about the men that they love, if it's an abusive and emotionally or physically abusive relationship, because you're trying to protect them. You don't want to betray them, and then you don't want people to know what you're going through at the same time. And so that's another piece of, several moments in my aunt's life and my mom's life, definitely. So in interviewing my great aunt, that was interesting. And then, I'm sorry, that Aunt Mildred, she was my mom's sister. But when I went to my great Aunt Catherine, and I'm sorry I interchanged aunt and aunt, but when I went to my great Aunt Catherine, and I asked her over the phone, and I said, I'm writing a story about the family, and I was wondering if I could talk to you about, your parents and, some of those things that had happened. And she said to me, I'm not talking to you about my family. And it stumped me, one, because I always knew, it's almost like I always knew that I would be there asking her a question which she would not answer, because this is the aunt who did not like the darker skinned grandkids or nieces and nephews. She wouldn't let us in her house sometimes to get water. She would leave us on her porch because we were too hot and sweaty and dark. She was one of those women who could pass. And so, like, when she told me that, I kind of knew it, even though I was taken aback. And I was like, wait a minute, this is my family too. This is your blood runs in my veins. So to her, I was just this nosy person. I was a nosy stranger who was asking questions about the family. And again, here's a point where Black people have grown up with the idea, the concept of don't air your dirty laundry in public. Don't tell your family business. If you tell your family business, that's the worst thing, right? That's the worst thing you could do. And for me, it's always been about, if you are suffering from a thing and you don't talk about it, but then you see other people are suffering from the same thing, how is that positive? How is this, how is it acceptable? And I think I kind of refused to be silent about the things that happened in my family, and I refused to let abusers, get away with that. So I can even, pull this image and this picture out into, our society. And the first abusers, of course, are, for us, the slave masters and the soldiers, who put us on the trail, and, people who essentially just, for whatever reason discriminated against us, or, were prejudiced or whatever. But like, that's abuse that we grew up, like we lived with, and it was in our collective membrane. It was like, you just accept it. You just say, yes, sir, no, sir. You move on and you survive. And your men won't be lynched. Your women won't be raped. And you move on and you survive. But that silence, the silence does not help anybody. When it's an abusive situation, when it's abusive like that, that silence just doesn't help anybody. I know that now.
So it sounds like you also, got a lot more out of the process of researching your family history than just the narrative, right? Just what historically happened. But it sounds like you also gained a sort of a freedom from that research. So how do you have any of your relatives that you've spoken with since starting the journey of writing the memoir? Have they had any different feelings about it, or how have they reacted to the novel? To the memoir?
So my mom, I gave my mom a copy of the memoir when I first finished the first draft, maybe about 7 years ago. And this was the first draft. And then I just kept working on it, editing, and, and then, of course, it was accepted by Wayne State University Press a couple of years ago, and it takes a couple of years to get to actually be published. So maybe it was longer than I gave her the manuscript. At any rate, when I gave her the manuscript, she read it and she said, "Well, you spelled Aunt Catherine's name wrong," and that's all she said to me. And but I knew and I felt that my mom really always wanted her story told. Like, she really always wanted a kind of vindication for what she had gone through, and she didn't have her own way of telling the story. So yes, I did get a lot out of the research process. I did come to a lot of moments of healing for myself as I was writing the book, and particularly in certain places where I didn't understand what had happened, what it meant for some of the things that had happened. There's a moment where I write in the book that so my siblings and I had gone to the country, Bangor, we call it the country. It's all kind of country down there. But we went to our uncle's house, grandfather's house, I'm sorry. It's actually my brother's and sister's grandfather, and I just happen to, I am the sixth child, fourth girl child, who is, I'm from the second marriage, so they're technically my half siblings. So we went to their grandfather's house, and we came back. When we came back, one of my mother's ex-boyfriends had poured acid over, had broken into our house and poured acid over everything that he had given her. And this was a man who had abused my mom physically and emotionally and psychologically. So as a kid, I must have been, 7 or 8 or 9 or something like that. And if that's a memory that you hold, it like a cell, like a cell in your body. And it's just something you come back to and you reflect on, and you're like, oh, so glad I survived that. But then it's like, what the heck was that? As you grow, they're like, why did that happen? Can a man be so hurt and so angry and vengeful that and from, a woman who had moved on, that he would do that? Did he love my mother that much? Or did he hate my mother that much? You know what I mean? So I'm asking these questions that I try to use to inform my relationships and to create better relationships. But as you know, you are inheriting your childhood environment. You know, you're inheriting the kinds of things that you've seen in your life. And for me, again, I was never physically abused by my mom or my dad. I was never in an abusive relationship, a physically abusive relationship. My first marriage was definitely emotionally and psychologically abusive. And even as I was writing, portions of this book, I was just it was weird because I could feel the parallel, and I could see the parallel of my relationship with my first marriage to things that I'd seen my mother and that I saw in my aunt and my sister's relationships. And I was like, oh no, I've got to get out of this. Like, it's like you said, you would never be in an abusive relationship, and though it's not physical, there's abuse happening here. And I think it's so I think a lot of women, that I talk to, my sisters, and we commiserate, and we're like, yeah, how did that happen? Like, how are we repeating our mother's lives? How are we repeating things that we said we would never endure or encounter? Like, how is that possible? So I'm hoping that my book, even if it doesn't introduce, I'm so sorry, it introduces, and even if I'm not pedantically trying to tell people what to do, but I'm hoping that if they see certain things that have happened in my family, that they can identify them for themselves and come to their own kind of realization, epiphany, way of healing, way of dealing and healing.
The thing that is resonating with me is the fact that you've had an opportunity to talk about issues and question issues, right, and have conversations, which I think seems to be sort of like a recurring theme with a lot of issues around race and racism, right? Because we haven't talked about it for so long, or haven't had conversations where maybe we could have the dialogue back and forth, either with family, and especially when my podcast is, helping inform parents, right? The role of we have to open up and we have to talk about things that we don't really want to talk about, but it's important, right? Because like you said, I think it does. Once we break that silence, like you said, I think you will start a healing process.
Yeah, I agree. I really agree. Yeah, and I mean, even with the piece about being a parent, and doing the best you can as a parent, right? As a Black parent in America, with all the things that we deal with. So Frances Cress Welsing, her knowing was, you should have something in your psyche to show that Black is beautiful all around your house. And that way, when they leave your home, they will still have a good sense of self-regard, as Toni Morrison calls that. They will have self-confidence. They will have a stronger sense of, I will accept this, I won't accept that. This is something that occurred to me that is wrong. I am going to name that thing that happened to me in my classroom with a white teacher, or on a bus stop, with a white man, or in another country. And that's I'll tell you that story in a minute. But if we are instilling our children with a sensibility that Black is beautiful, Black is not just beautiful, Black is magical. Like, Black is, Rebecca Walker said something about, I was at a reading with Rebecca Walker a year and a half ago, and she said, no one can take funk from Black people. Like, funk is indigenously African, and that's the thing, And I was like, yes. I was like, Black is funky, So that's the thing that you as a parent you want to give to your kids. And I think that it's a little harder to do that when you are just trying to survive in your life as a woman who has been abused, or a woman who has been in any way, molested as a child, and you're living with that memory. And so, the role of the parent, particularly the role of the Black parent, is such an important job. It's such an important job. And I want to say, I know that my mother and my aunts, the mannerism comes back to me in certain moments. But I also know that I'm learning to stand up for myself when I do things like this. I was in Egypt a couple of December 2017, and at this time I had decided that I would not tolerate accidental racism, right? Like if someone says something and if I'm in their presence or if they ask me a question, I was going to say something. So I was in Egypt, and these two tall white guys were coming out of the National Egyptian Museum behind me. And one of the guys said, "Man, that was so racist. Was that racist?" And so I guess they thought I was Muslim or, something. But I turn around to them and I say, "Do you guys want to run it by me? Because I think I could tell you whether or not that was racist." And they were like, no, we don't want to do that. And so, that's a moment where I learned to stand up, as in myself as a Black woman, no matter where I am in the world. And it feels good the more that you do it in a nice way, in a way that is constructive, in a way that hopefully that person will go to the next person and they'll say, "Hey, did you know that when you say this, or when you think that, or when you do this, that's racist against some people. That's racist against people of color. That some people might misinterpret that." So even in the book, you can tell that my family, we don't pussyfoot. We're very just kind of blunt, and hopefully you love us.
So now, how does your I guess your understanding of who you are, racially, right? How is that informed by your triraciality, right? Your ethnicity?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Identity, I have learned, is in the blood, but identity is also more than the blood. And I say this because growing up, asking my mom, "What are we?" And my mom saying to me, you are French, you are German, you are Indian, and you are a little bit of Black. And so I accepted it. And I was like, okay, so I'm French, I'm German. She didn't say white. She didn't say European. It was like those ethnicities, right? So, but when I went to school and I looked like a Black girl and I had to claim something, and then people would always ask me, "What are you mixed with?" And it was just for me, it was like the oddest question when I was younger. And then I started thinking, I was like, well, you are mixed. Or I don't know if it was like a thought, but it was like, you can't claim white because that'll get you beat up. And you don't look white. So you can't claim that. But you have what looks like the features of Indian. Like you are a light-skinned girl. So my identity became, for me, Black Indian, Black woman in America, American Indian woman in America, sharing the same kinds of struggles and triumphs and celebrating the culture. I've danced powwow for like 11 years. And then for 10 years, I danced West African dance. I was really involved in my West African culture and roots. But always going back to the question of what are you mixed with? And I'm like, why do you have to orient me? Why do we feel like we have to categorize a person's race and ethnicity in order to feel comfortable in our own skin, right? And so, like, that is a really interesting question that I've dealt with as a writer, as a researcher, and then theoretically, you know, in the books that I teach as a professor. What makes us feel safe when we know what a person is, or what makes us feel like we can operate, or maybe we can say certain things to a mixed blood person that we wouldn't say to other people. I saw a talk by this guy who's black and white. I think he said his mom is white, his dad is black, and sometimes his friends would say, "Oh, but you're okay because you're half white," and it's like, well, really, like. What does that mean? So are you negating the half black part of him? And did he speak up for himself? Did he speak up for himself? And so a lot of that piece about you know, that mixed race recovery, and reconciling your triraciality is about saying, for me, I know how I identify. I identify as Black Indian, but I know from my DNA that I do have European, so I do have British, I do have Irish. 7 generations back, I have a full-blood ancestor. This is what the DNA from 23andMe said. 7 generations back, I have a full-blood American Indian ancestor. I can point directly to that person. Like, I know who that person is. I know their tribe, several of them. But when my DNA said, you have a 7 generations back, you have a full-blood Ashkenazi Jewish ancestor. And I was like, what? Who is that? Who is this Jewish person on my family tree? We never had a menorah. We never knew, you know what I mean? Like, did this person disappear in our family? Like, how is that possible? We did have a Mahoney, and I always thought, okay, there's the Irish part. You know, one of my grandfathers married a Mahoney. But who's this Jewish person? You know, so for me, it is now definitely having a sense of awareness. And even when I went to England, you know, I did feel a connection to Cornwall, which for me was odd because, you know, I'm thinking Africa is my homeland and America is my homeland. And here I am in England. So it is now a part of my job is acknowledging all of those ancestors. When we do ceremony, we say, depending on the ceremony, we say a thing, American Indian ceremony, we will say all my relations. And when we say all my relations, that is every ethnicity and race, which is a construction, you know, but every tribe that you belong to from the beginning of time, millennia, you are praying for yourself and you're praying for all those relations, however you came to be. So a part of that is saying, all right, I know I have this ancestry, which I was never categorized as, and my mother would always say she was human. She would never say she wouldn't fully claim on the sheet, you know, whatever the little boxes. She would never claim fully Negro. She wouldn't claim white. She would write her own little box and say human. And you know, and I think that is like a very passive aggressive and then at the same time direct way of saying you can't classify me. There is no classification for who I am. Why don't you just call me human? And we'll leave it like that. So yeah, I think that's a part of, you know, it is. We are trying to reconcile. We are trying to. I am trying to educate myself on it. When I tell people, when I'm lecturing and I'm in a room full of white people, and I start talking about heredity and identity and raciality and these coexisting and tri-existing, you know, spaces of a mixed blood person, and I'll say to them, you know, we could be cousins. And half of the room will look at me like, what? Offended, and I can see it. And the other half, yeah, we could be cousins, And so that always gives me hope when the other half of the room is accepting. And it's like, okay, because if you can accept me as your cousin, if you can accept me as a mixed blood person, as someone who had a different upbringing and experience in America, then maybe we can come to a place where, we can start eking out and addressing those past, just systemic ills that Black Americans, people who have been classified as Black Americans, no matter how light or how white they look, if we can actually start saying, yeah, you could be my, in the 21st century, you could be my cousin. How about I treat every other person who looks like you, or every other person of this in this ilk or this race or whatever? How about I treat them with fairness? How about I treat them like my family, like my relatives? Like, I want to do well by them. I want them to do good. I want to do, good in my, I'm not saying that correctly, but I want us all to have the same kinds of life and the same schooling and the same economic bracket. And you know what I mean? So, and maybe that is being a bit simplistic. Our society is so problematic, and it was designed for division. It was designed with division in place. So maybe that is simplistic, but we have to do what we can do in society to just move the human race forward. So thank you for allowing me to share. I'm hoping that that the book does do more good. More good in this society. Tomorrow, it'll be 1 week before my book is released. So I have some interviews, I have some podcasts, I have a lot of events happening. So I have on August 24th, I am on 2 panels at the Leimert Park Book Fair. So the first panel is at 10 a.m., and that's with Luis Rodriguez, who is a former poet laureate of L.A., and he's also mixed blood. So we're talking about what it means to be a geography of the blood, who gets to call themselves what they get to call themselves, and how we write about it. The 4:30 panel, it's mixed race and writing. So I have 4 biracial, triracial writers, and we're going to talk, really just kind of, explore what it means to be a mixed race writer. And then I also have on September 7th in New York, I will be talking in discussion with another author at the Seaport Literary Festival and in New York. And then on September 11th, I will be at SO1 Books in Los Angeles at 6 p.m. And then that same evening at 8:30, I will be reading at the World Stage. So, and September 22nd at 2 p.m., I'm at the Autry. So, there's so much happening, and I will definitely send you the flyer.
So for our listeners, how can they learn more about you and the upcoming book?
They can go to my website, which is shondabuchanan.com, SHOND as in David, A, B as in boy, UCHANAN.com. They can also go to Amazon. They can order the book Black Indian on Amazon. My bio is there, so they can learn more information about me there. And they can also go to Wayne State University Press, and I have a page on that website as well. And if they want to contact me, they can contact me through my website, which is my info at shondabuchanan.com.
I want to thank my guest, Shonda Buchanan, for joining us for this episode of What is Black Podcast. And I also want to thank you all for listening to this episode. As always, We'd love to hear from you and hear your comments and feedback about this episode. And to listen to other great episodes, please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And remember to download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.